Joining me now, Ashley Parker, White House bureau chief for the Washington Post, Phil Rucker, senior Washington correspondent for the Washington Post, and David Ignatius, a Washington Post columnist who covers foreign affairs and everything else. So, Phil, President Biden speaking with Macron today. I know that the White House thought that this was making too much of a big deal over something, but having been at the UN and talking to the French officials, let me tell you, there are words for how they felt about all of this, which I guess I can't say on television, even in French. But they're not taking it lightly.
Not at all, Andrea. And reading the statement that came out from the White House a few minutes ago, it does appear that the two presidents have patched things up and they've agreed to meet in October in Europe to discuss further. And importantly, Macron announced that, or according to the statement, Macron agreed to send the French ambassador back to Washington next week, and the ambassador will continue discussions on the U.S. side. So there seems to be some sort of commitment from both countries to repair this relationship, and an acknowledgement by Biden that the communication channels were not what they should have been leading up to the announcement earlier this month with the deal with Australia.
Ashley, is there any acknowledgement on the White House National Security team that perhaps they took the French for granted?
Well, if you just look at that statement, the acknowledgement, privately, the White House sort of has the posture of what you said, that the French overreacted. And in some ways, this was much ado about nothing. But this is a key ally. They are deeply upset. And you see in that statement coming from the White House an acknowledgement that at the very least, forget about the substance of the deal, but there should have been better communication, more clear channels. And the thing that really stung the president were these allegations by the French that he was behaving the way former President Donald Trump would have, that this process, and again, not necessarily the substance, but at the very least, this process was sort of ad hoc and slapdash and disrespectful of a stalwart ally in the way the French would have expected of the former president, but not the current one.
And the fact that Macron is facing an election next year was also galling to them, that Joe Biden would not have realized that in an election year, when he's got this far-right opponent rising up for next year, it's the worst possible time to be robbing France of, $60 billion and all of those jobs. David Ignatius, the president's speech yesterday really ignored all of these issues, ignored the controversy among many European NATO allies about the way we withdrew, the timing of the withdrawal from Afghanistan, not listening to their complaints back at the ministerial meeting, and, going ahead with the withdrawal that became rather messy, to say the least. So, did the speech accomplish what the president wanted, to reassure the allies that America is indeed back, as he had promised at the G7 and in Brussels?
Andrea, it put down Biden's marker clearly and firmly. He said 20 years of war is over. I'm the first president in 20 years to speak to you without an ongoing war. I think that was significant and welcome. He said that we need our allies. We want to work through multilateral forums to achieve our foreign policy goals. It was in tone so different from what we heard during the 4 years of the Trump administration that I'm sure people welcomed that. The problem, as we have been noting, has been with execution in Biden foreign policy. And I think our European allies, our Asian allies, want to see clearer, better planned, more consultation in the process, rollout of the foreign policy. France is a perfect example of that. But I thought all the words were right. What Europe is waiting for, what Asia is waiting for, what the world is waiting for, is to see how the Biden team executes.
And it's so interesting that he, without mentioning China by name, not once, there was so much about China in the substance of the speech about going forward.
So, Andrea, China is the subtext for everything that happens in foreign policy now. China, although we haven't been noticing it, is executing what I wrote this morning in the Washington Post is a significant leftward turn that's shaking financial markets around the world, that really is taking the China we've known for the last 40 years and changing it sharply. So the world's going to figure out, what does that mean for us? What does that mean in terms of potential economic competition, military competition? But I think, as I said at the outset, China is the invisible phrase between the lines of every foreign policy speech now.
And in fact, it's the motivation of defending against China, an increasingly militant China, that motivated the president's deal with Australia for the nuclear submarines. It's all about the Indo-Pacific, but trying to, at the same time, to reassure Europe that he's not ignoring Europe, David.
Yes, just to say one more thing about this. I thought the most important aspect of the statement that was released after the phone call today between Presidents Macron and Biden was that a process of consultation about how France can be part of our strategy in the Indo-Pacific is going to take place now. It'll begin when their ambassador, Philippe Etienne, comes back next week. It'll continue into October. There'll be a face-to-face meeting. France wants to be part of the American allied strategy in Asia, even though it doesn't want to be quite as close to us in contesting, sometimes confronting China as we'd like. But they want to be there. That was what the real sting of being left out of the submarine deal was all about. China is crucial for France. They want to be part of this broad allied effort to deal with China.
And resenting very much the Anglo-American, the Australian, UK, and American exclusion of France to that regard. Well, all this on the foreign front, and Ashley and Phil, we're going to be watching what happens when the president wrestles in separate meetings with the progressives and the moderates with his whole domestic agenda at stake. We're going to have to take that up on another day, but it's going to be very tough because time is running out. Thank you all with this breaking news on France.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Ashley, Phil, and of course, David.